Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar. Thank you so much for the patience. And now we're going to start the talk. I'm super excited to have you here. We also got to know that there were a lot of registrations as well, and a lot of people were interested in basically looking into what I have to say. And that is absolutely exciting and amazing. So, we are going to look into a couple of things, and I'm going to just get started now. Let's do this. I'm going to also start sharing my screen. Alrighty. So give me a thumbs up if you all can hear me well. Awesome. I see Lee, Fang, everyone. Cool, cool, cool. Thank you so much for joining. So today, let me actually, make the environment a bit cooler. So how open source changed my life, and that is the topic for today. But I'm gonna actually start with a story. In 2016, something really happened. When Angular 2 was being revamped completely from scratch, and a lot of people have been working with Angular 1 or Angular JS, as we call it now, they were a bit shocked. They were also super nervous as well. They were confused. And I was one of those people. A lot of people were just sad. Why? Because they spent a year or two learning something that is now just going to be nuked. It's not going to be there. And then people were afraid that their skill set is just gone or is outdated. But a lot of people were really excited. And I was actually one of the people who were excited because of the things that I saw being improved in Angular. And working with Angular for so long, I needed those things to be improved. So one day in 2016, I was at a conference in one of the prominent universities in my city, Karachi, and the university is Mohammad Ali Jinnah University, or we call it Maju. There was an event happening. The event was ngconf, and actually ngconf extended, where there were a lot of people, about 100 developers, just there looking at a screen of people in America talking about Angular. It was both crazy and interesting, but the fun part was we also had some local developers who were prominent and they were giving talks as well. But the majority of it was just us viewing the live conference together. And that was really cool. And I was there. At that time, I was basically a nobody. Nobody knew me in the conference, almost no one. There were some friends that came with me, or I convinced them to go to the conference. And there were some people that were from my past workplace. But essentially, nobody knew me, unlike today. And I was happy. Why? Because while learning Angular, I actually made a couple of people my idols, or the people that I look up to. One of them was John Papa. He's still one of the people that I really admire a lot. And whenever I saw him, I was always in the awe of how he talked, how he walked, his body gestures, and his way of actually explaining the concepts so clearly that even a beginner could understand. And I actually loved that particular part. And he was already a Google developers expert when this was happening. During the event, something happened. After the talks, the host basically said, all right, we have a particular task for you all, and we are going to give it to you, and we are going to give you some time to do it. There were a lot of people who were mentors. They were just roaming around in the conference. The conference was super cool. Those classic stairs stacking on top of each other. And I was sort of at the top or almost at the top. And then we were all just starting to code, and everybody was excited. And I was really excited. I just wanted to finish that as soon as possible. And even though this was not really a competition, when I was done, I just instantly raised my hand and I was like, hey, I'm done with the task. And the host, Muhammad Umar Khan, who was standing on the stage, he basically said, come up here. And I was shocked, confused, nervous. I still remember going on the stage, being so nervous, the sweating down my palms, my heart racing. And I had to go on the stage to basically show how I did the task. But then, in just a bit, we had an applause happening. Everybody was applauding, and I was super interested on, you know, why did that happen? And suddenly everything changed. There were about 100 developers in the room just applauding for me. And that was the best feeling ever. I did not plan for it, I did not expect it, but that basically happened. So, just a bit about myself. I'm Mohammed Ahsan. I'm a Google developers expert in Angular for the past 5 to 6 years. I'm also the head instructor and a software architect at SALT, School of Applied Technology in Stockholm, Sweden. And I'm also the author of the Angular Cookbook. If you're interested in the Angular Cookbook itself, you need to go to ng-cookbook.com, and you can wait for a month because my second book is coming out in December. Having the shameless pitch, let's talk about what happened after. So during this particular time, I was actually working on a really cool, large-scale Angular project with Angular 2.0. I had juniors I was mentoring. I had this really cool app that I was architecting. I was feeling on the top of the world because I was creating these reusable components which were so easy to use and so cool that I was really proud of them. And those were the things that I would also talk to the other teams on, hey, this is how we should do things when it comes to web development, even though I had about an experience of 2.5 to 3 years back then. On this particular project, I worked for 2.5 years. You can imagine the scale of this project, but also the features that were in this project were also the features which were not even in Facebook back then. Imagine events, groups, organizations not being in Facebook, but in this particular project. So I was super happy of having this large scale project to work on. It also brought a lot of technical challenges along the way and also provided me a lot of learning opportunities. And also, I was leading the team. But this is how I looked back then. You can see my love for the app that you see vaguely on the screen. It had maps and whatnot. So 2.5 years of efforts, but the end of it, the project never went live. And yeah, that is sad. So as a result, this is what happened. That was me when I was leaving the company. And I was like, okay, as a result, I had nothing to show for my 2.5 years of work where I can claim I did something cool. I led this team. But then how do I show that? How do I go to different interviews and say I have this immense experience of building cool things that nobody can see basically? So after my 2.5 years of work, I had nothing. But during those years, something amazing really happened. And I'm going to talk about what those were. Open source contributions is basically one of those. That's when I actually started doing open source. So let's talk about some of my open source contributions throughout that particular year. We're talking about 2016 now. This is my first contribution ever that I made to open source. Let's have a look. I created a pull request against a project called Angular Timeline. I created an issue, and then I also wrote a solution. I changed 5, or no, not 5, but 9 different files. And then the organizer or the owner basically asked me to update something. And then immediately said, I'm going to do it myself. And then this PR was closed. But there was one fault from my end as well, because you can see this was October 4 and this is November 6. So I didn't really reply to that. So my first pull request, actual pull request, did not get accepted. Let's talk about my second pull request. Did not get accepted. I contributed to Angular Perfect scroll bar, had changes in 3 files, but then the organizer or the owner said, since we have already some pull requests that do the same thing, we're not probably going to do that. And this was rejected or declined. The third one also got declined and did not make it. I made a few changes, but I did not add some tests to this. That was also a learning point for me because after all all this conversation happened, this did not really end up in the project itself. And these were essentially some projects which had some traction. For example, 232 stars on GitHub is not a small deal. I usually say that if you get 100 stars on GitHub, it's like a million followers on Instagram because almost nobody clicks this button. Almost nobody on GitHub. And if you're a developer, you can probably tell me in the comments if you have ever given a star to a GitHub repository or no. So just type yes or no, and then I'll know. So, talk about my fourth contribution. There we go. This is the contribution that I did on the event that I talked about, the ngconf extended, where this was the task that was given. And this is a pull request that I created against a particular project, but this was never meant to be merged. This was just for everyone else to show that they could work with Angular. And that's pretty much it. This is what I did for more than a year back then. If you look at my contributions from there, you'll see that I have created a lot of issues in different repositories, just creating issue. Created an issue here, created a pull request that never got merged. I've created this pull request that never got merged. So a lot of things never got merged, really. But that really did not stop me. I found an interesting problem where I needed to work with Slack that had a bunch of emojis, but I wanted to do that in Angular. So I came up with this tiny little library called ng2 emoji. This was for Angular version 2, 7 years ago, or 8 years ago, I think the first commit was. It has 25 stars. Looks like some people actually used that, but it was as simple as just looking at your particular HTML. And if you are using any of those colon emoji colon thingy, it would just replace that with an actual emoji. To be honest, I did not really come up with the idea myself. I saw it somewhere else with jQuery or Angular 1, and I basically copied that. That was my first library ever. I don't think it's as useful, but it was something that people ended up using. But then later in November, something happened. With this project that did not give me any portfolio to show because it wasn't live, there was a demand of this project, and we needed to do something special, something that did not really exist. We needed to detect if our application is running on a mobile device or a desktop device. And that is when I actually started looking for it. I searched and searched on Google, but I did not find anything for Angular 2 Plus. I could, however, find this particular library. It was ng device detector, which was created for Angular 1. And when I looked at it, I looked at the stars. I was like, okay, 240 stars, not too bad. Issues, just one issue. Ooh, that's amazing. Because I usually see those when I'm using a library, and that means this library is really solid, not many issues. So I started digging into the code base of this one. It was not super complex. When I looked into it, it was using a bunch of libraries, a bunch of third-party libraries as well. And then when I looked into the code base itself, this is what I could see with the tests and the actual code base. So what did I do with this one? Just like a good software developer, I copy pasted. That's what I get paid for the past 10 years. That's what I did. The change that I did was that I converted this from JavaScript to TypeScript, and then I essentially changed it to Angular 2. This is how it looks like today. However, if I open this, I can show you something special. First of all, this is a library that people started using over the years. The impact was not direct. It was not day one that people actually started using this library. It was quite a lot of time before it got some traction. Secondly, it still has below 500 stars on GitHub. If I open GitHub, you can see it still has 497. But the people that we have here might raise it to above 500. Who knows? I'm going to share the link in the chat anyways. One important thing that I want to share is not all the code in the repository is mine. I do not claim it. Because this is open source, a lot of it is actually contributed by other people. And especially even today, the latest release that we did for the Angular version 17, which was launched on November the 6th this year, I released a new version, but I did not contribute a single line of code to this update, to this release. It was this person who actually contributed it. So the beauty of open source is my career growth is now boosted by people who are contributing to open source projects that I created. And this is amazing because I don't have to do all the efforts. I'm giving to the community and the community gives back. And that is the awesome thing about being human. This repository recently has crossed 10 million installs on npm. If you go to the repository, you're going to find that badge right here because I made sure that it's there. 10 million. And only on GitHub, we have about 4,500 projects using this. So it's used by 4,500 projects, this library. I do not claim this is the most prominent library for Angular, but I think it's something significant. And on NPM, we have almost 150,000 downloads for this library per week. This is amazing. And this is all due to the community that we have built around this library who uses it. And this, as I said, has had a great impact on my career because this is something that I can show as a number when needed. So this changed my perspective about open source in general. This changed a lot, to be honest. I started realizing a couple of things. One, I have been using so many cool libraries for free because they're open sourced. I've worked basically with projects of really cool people that I can look at the code at and learn myself how to code better, how to organize better, and then also maybe contributing as well. And when contributing to those projects, those big projects, just like small things even, I could see what is the standard that senior developers and architects work with. But one of the things that I noticed when I was looking at all the libraries during this era of working with that large scale project and even after is that I did not really see any repositories, any open source projects from Pakistan, where I'm from. And that was, to be honest, a bit sad because I started thinking, is it the reality that we are consumers of technology, but we are neither creating nor contributing to that? And I wanted to see more of the people around me to do that because then I would have a lot of people to talk to about these things, about contributing, about the latest trends in Angular. And that was the moment when I decided to contribute more to open source and to spread the expertise that I had. This was not to gain something. This was not to gain more money. This was not to gain a better career, but this was basically to see more people involved in creating and contributing to the tech, more people, especially around me in my city, in my country. And for that, I did a couple of things. But as I said, the goal was not to be consumers, but then creators and contributors as well. So I took the following steps. I started answering questions on Stack Overflow. This is something that we think only experts can do, but to be honest, anyone can jump in. I have known a lot of developers, a lot of junior developers even, who started doing this and really enjoyed, because when you go to Stack Overflow, you find some questions that are super basic. How do I concatenate two different arrays? Now, there might be duplicate questions, but you can still answer those questions. And if no one reports them, then you have the luxury to get reputation on Stack Overflow. And I think I stopped after getting about 1,300 or something reputation, but I know people have thousands and thousands of reputation points on Stack Overflow. that actually shows your expertise as well. And when you start giving those answers on Stack Overflow, my goal was to give answers, not to give the best answers. That also allowed me to get criticism, which was sometimes hurting. I was like, who's this guy telling me not to give my opinion like this? But that also, when I took it sort of positively, I actually learned a lot how to make my answers concrete, how to not just say things, but giving good examples along with that. And that goes not only with answering questions on Stack Overflow, but it's generally when you go and ask some people some questions. For example, when you have seniors, when you have a forum, when you try to go there, you try to be explicit, as detailed as possible. One of my all-time favorite links that I share with everyone is this one: don'tasktoask.com. And everyone who's from my community right now in the chat, they know this one. And this basically is a site which is really simple, probably the most performant site on earth. And this basically says, if you have a question, please be more detailed. Don't ask any Java experts around, because this entails a lot of problems like this. So I'm not going to go into details of this one, but just answering questions on Stack Overflow improved a lot of things that you can imagine. My ability to communicate things well, to communicate with examples, to communicate clearly, to understand the concept or understand the text that someone else has written, which means the questions, to also respond to the comments in a polite way, because Stack Overflow is sort of like Reddit. I mean, Reddit is more harsh, but Stack Overflow can be sometimes as well. But that also increased my ability to write, and that also contributed to tutorials. When I now create tutorials, I have all the experience that I've spent on Stack Overflow to write those. Another initiative that I came up was, I convinced my company to make this part of our culture to contribute to open source. I was part of the team called Magic. Now, I've been part of different teams in all the companies I've worked with, majorly in employee enhancements or employee programs. And this was one of the programs that I was responsible for. Even though I was not very senior in the company, I still was one of the core people who was driving the company's culture. And I made it sure that not only we have this culture that is sort of asking people to do it voluntarily, but then also it has some benefits for even more motivation when it comes to monetary values. For example, the yearly review that you have, if you can show that you did open source contributions, if you gave tech talks, if you did all of that or any of that, then yes, you have more reasons to get a raise, because you're providing more value, not only to the company, but then outside the company as well. So I made sure that the environment that I have has something that has this open source contribution culture as common. And one of the books that I was reading recently was Atomic Habits. And I'm not sure if you have read that, but I also really liked this point where they said that if you want to do something, if you want to create a habit, you try to make your environment, or you change your environment to something that has that particular habit as a norm. So you don't feel the stress to do it, or you don't feel that you need to put a lot of effort to do that, because it's the norm. And this part really helped me, because I was on the top to implement this, monitor this, but then also I had to lead an example by doing it myself. And then I started creating a lot of open source contributions. But just to be clear, open source contributions are not creating libraries, not contributing in terms of code to GitHub projects. But it's also, if you find an issue, you just create a GitHub issue for that. If you find a typo in a documentation, you just go there and create a pull request with that. And funnily, one of my major contributions to one of the biggest projects today is basically improving documentation, and that was Angular. So my first contribution to a big project was basically to improve a documentation. And it's really small contributions like this that count. When this happened, I also started giving talks at small conferences, because, as I said, I wanted more people to contribute to share their knowledge, to be the creators and contributors of tech. And trust me when I say this, those small conferences, a lot of them was just disasters. I failed miserably in demos quite a lot. Things did not really work. I also had issues with my slides sometimes not being completed or rehearsed. But then it got better over time. There were a few mishaps, but things got better. And then something happened. After giving a few talks in my local community, in my city, a person named Mashood reached out to me, Mashood Rastakar. He was running a consultancy firm, and then the company where I was before, where I had the 2.5 years project, I decided to switch from that company. And I decided it because I usually say that if I'm the smartest person in the room, I'm probably in the wrong room. So I was giving a lot to my juniors, but I was not growing myself at any pace because I was involved in a lot of things and I was not technically challenged with the things that I had. And so this guy reached out to me and he says, "Do you want to join my team? It's a startup, it's a small company, but we have really, really technically strong people and we're looking for more strong people like you." And funny enough, he got my recommendation from the person who was at the ngconf extended as a host. The person, if you remember, who called me on stage and said, "Can you please show your code to the audience?" is the person who recommended myself to him. Now, it could be that he remembered me from the conference. I don't know. But it could also be that I also had an interview with that person in his company as well, and he really liked me. So it could be either of those. I don't really know. But small things like this, when you see it backwards in the past, you start connecting all those dots. What is the significance of this person? He actually was planning to apply for this cool program called the Google Developers Expert. I did not even know what that means. I didn't know the term at all. And then I thought to myself, can I become one too? I think I'm pretty decent at Angular. And then when I thought about it for a long time, I got to a conclusion and my brain said, yes, why not? So I basically consulted him. I asked him, what is the process? How are you trying to apply for this? And he mentioned to me what his plan was. He was planning to create a Google Sheet listing all of his impact, his contributions, sort of making a really good case for him to be accepted into the program. So Mashood asked me at the moment, because I was too excited, that I said, "Can you please recommend me to the program?" And he basically said no, but in a polite way. He said that I should spend more time in building up a really good case for myself and sort of having a portfolio. And I remember it was about October or September when I asked him. And he said that right now, a lot of people are actually applying, and there's a second round coming in April next year. So that's when you can apply. And this program, no one can actually go and apply for themselves. It's usually a Googler who works at Google or another expert who can basically recommend you for this particular program. So he said, take more time, build your portfolio. And then after a while, when I did all of that, I went and gave talks to some conferences. I started giving workshops, really small workshops. I remember on my first workshop, there were just 7 people. And out of those, only 3 knew Angular and what I was going to talk about. And it was an advanced Angular talk, and everyone else did not know Angular at all. So the start was pretty shaky, but I was more interested in getting things done and not the amount of people who come in, even though if it was important. I started documenting all of that into a Google Sheet. And if you're listening to what I'm saying, anyone can become a Google developer expert if they really go through this path. If they try to document all of their changes and then can show they're an expert, you can go to Google or have someone nominate you and then they take interviews, and then if you're accepted, yeah, you're a GD. It's not that difficult, but you need to be an expert from the get-go. So when that happened, I actually got an email from Google that I've been nominated and I should fill a form that should contain my impact for the past 3 years. By the way, this is also the time when I actually started my YouTube channel. And it was like super small. I have no subscribers whatsoever. Back then, when I started creating some tutorial videos, I also listed those in my document. And then I took about, I think, 1.5 hours to actually fill that whole form. Even though the numbers were not really great, they were significant in terms of having the ng2 emoji library, having the ngx device detector. That was also something that was gaining some popularity as well. And then I had written a bunch of articles as well on Medium. I combined all of those things and then I showed to Google via this form that I have the expertise that it takes to be a GD. So then, after a couple of interviews, I met Stephen Fluen. If you don't know who he is, he used to be the DevRel person or the person who's the face of Angular back then. And he was from the Angular's core team at Google. Now imagine working on a framework from day one of your career, being so, I wouldn't say obsessed, but attached to it that you start loving it and then you grow your career on it. So it has a really important significance in your career itself. And then meeting a person from the creator of that framework. You can imagine my emotions, my overwhelming emotions back then. I know I was sweating, I was shaking, and that was an interview, of course, by someone who knows how Angular was created for me, who now needs to prove that I know Angular. So even though this was a remote talk, it was tough, but I was able to answer the questions that he asked. And then there was a long wait. They said that the process can take from 1 month to 3 months. And I was just waiting. I was checking my email every single day, just waiting. And then one day, this happened. I got the email that said, "Hey, Ahsan, congratulations on successfully passing the last step of the assessment. And now you are a Google Developers Expert. Just signed the NDA and you're good to go." And this was the moment I remember that I've screamed the most in my life. I was happy. I was on the top of the world. The emotions were mixed with happiness, with being proud of myself that I've achieved something. And I think just the dopamine level was up there. I don't think I can explain that in words, what I felt, but I hope you, you understand how I was feeling. But you know what happened right after? It was silence. I felt hollow. The question that came to my mind was, all right, I've been working for 8 months on this thing. I've achieved it. What's next? And now that I think about it, the more I realize that this is essentially how we humans work. We chase a goal and we think that that is the ultimate thing that we want in our lives, whether it's money, whether it's career, whether it's getting the Google Developers Expert title. But when you achieve it, there's this emptiness, there's this hollowness. Like, what am I supposed to do now? What's my aim? And the reality is that you need a bigger goal. You need something that is sustainable, that keeps you motivated. Now, I often say this, that there's no one else that's going to come and put motivation in my brain. It's going to be me, myself, who's going to motivate myself. And also for that, I need cues. I need reasons for that. And if I don't have a bigger goal, a goal that can never be, that can never have a deadline, so to say, that you can't ever say this is done. If you have that goal, then you can be more focused, you can be more motivated, and this is something that won't ever have that hollowness. So I needed a bigger goal. I was done with being a GDE. And the goal that I moved towards was the same as when I started open source. I forgot about it during the whole process. But I reminded myself that the reason why I started to do open source was to enable more of the people around me to create, to contribute to open source. I also started doing all of this to make lives easier for the others. If I'm facing a technical challenge, whether it's with a programming language or a framework or a library or a tutorial, I don't want the next person to go through the same difficulty. I want to make it easier for them. And that is the goal that I took. That is also the goal that I transformed or wrote or sort of concised into I need to be an educator. When you have a goal that is something that should happen, you're focusing on the outcome. If you don't get the outcome, you're demotivated. And that's not what I wanted. I shifted my focus to something else. And I unconsciously, or not unconsciously, but subconsciously did that. And when I read books now, I realize that I've been subconsciously doing the same things that people recommend in the books. For example, Atomic Habit also talks about it. And the formula that I took without realizing it's a formula is I thought about myself, my identity on what I need to be or what I want to be rather than what I want to achieve. I want to be someone who contributes to open source. I want to be an educator. I want to be someone who does charity in terms of education. I'm a Muslim, and the only things that can help Muslims, according to scholars and books, or the three things that come to your benefit is one, if you're educating someone, that goes forever and ever, as long as that person is benefiting from it. The second one is charity. As long as the charity goes on, if you build, I don't know, a school, as long as people study from that school and they pass on the knowledge forward, you get a reward for the afterlife. And the third one is if you have a pious offspring, if you have children who are pious, who are connected to the creator and do good deeds. So I need to cover at least one of them. Monetary needs a lot of money if I want to do charity. Education is something I can do. That is what I've basically had as my goal for years. So when I create videos now, and now we have about 15,000 YouTube subscribers, we have now 20,000 Facebook followers. And as much as I hate to talk about these numbers, unfortunately, these numbers is what get people excited. I think about 5,000 on TikTok. I hate the platform. We have about 7,000 or something on Instagram as well. But the idea is the more people I can educate, the more happy I feel because that is something I can take with myself that, okay, I'm achieving something. That also takes care of one really important thing that you might have heard of, the imposter syndrome. It's common, everybody feels that. And the reality is that only the people who are skilled feel that. If someone is not skilled, they're not going to feel like, oh, I'm probably here by mistake. It's probably luck. I don't really deserve. No, they would not because they would not be there. But if you're skilled, you often think like I might be here by just mistake. I'm being a fraud. I don't really know all of this stuff. And this is something that I face all the time. But these things, educating people, getting their feedback, going to conferences, talking to you folks, is something that gives me courage that I am on the right track. I am doing good and I have the skills. That's why people are saying that my content helped them. And this really makes it easy if you do what's on the screen. That's what I've been doing since then. Small wins and celebrating them. If you know me for a long time, you know that I've said this quite a lot of times that even if I do a really small thing, I talk about it, I share that on social media. This is also for sharing knowledge, first of all, but then also to tackle this imposter syndrome as well. So I don't really have that haunting me that I don't know anything, or I'm probably here by mistake, or I'm a fraud or something. So sharing small wins, whether you have created a really small pull request that has fixed a typo, celebrate it. If you have created a project that doesn't work, but you have created it and deployed it on GitHub pages, celebrate it. Share it with your friends. There will be people who will criticize you. There will also be people who will criticize you in a positive manner to help you grow. Find a mentor, discuss with them, but don't forget to celebrate your small wins. How do you celebrate it? You basically tell your loved ones about your achievements. That is the first step I would do. I would talk to my wife, I would talk to my mother, and I would share with them, this is what happened. For example, if we have graduates from Salt, where I teach as a head instructor, I talk to my family about them, like, these many people graduated, this person actually created this cool project, and it's so amazing to see that only in 3 months they could do that. Now I basically have nothing that I've done to contribute to that. I mean, some maybe, but majority of it is they actually went through the boot camp and they built themselves. I mean, there's little contribution from my side, but even that really gives me joy and then makes the others happy as well. So those sort of hormones that we have in our brains, we talk about oxytocin, we can talk about dopamine, we can talk about endorphins, but all of them, when you try to have conversations with the people you trust, they can be your family, they can be your friends. And if you don't really care about criticism from social media, just post there, because I really don't. When I often tell this to my developers, that when I'm having a really good day, I just go and post on Reddit, and then I get get all the hate. Or I play Dota 2. So that's the most toxic environment ever. So I've built a tolerance of getting all that negative comments, but then also not just thinking everything is negative, but also picking positive criticism from that as well. If someone says your content sucks, I would ask, can you be more specific on how I can improve? Because just saying your content sucks doesn't really make sense. So that's what I would suggest you to do. Start sharing on social media if you feel confident, or with your family and friends. So since then, I've been celebrating small wins, and I think that is essentially the way to go. If you're wondering how to start contributing to open source, the easiest way I can tell you is, the mindset should not be that I'm contributing to a big project. I'm contributing to something that has a large number. That's not the idea. The idea is, you are someone who is going to be someone that contributes to open source. Have that sort of mindset. Attach it with your identity. You are someone who loves to share knowledge. You are someone who loves to contribute. It doesn't really matter then if you're contributing to a big project or a small project. It doesn't matter. You're helping someone. And in result, you're gaining something secondary. I've never had this sort of mindset to contribute having monetary outcomes. I've had people in my family asking me, why am I going to conferences? Are they paying me? So a lot of conferences I paid myself for the travel and everything, but I went there first to have a feeling of satisfaction that I'm contributing. And then also I know that as a secondary result, sometimes you get the results, you get the benefits, you get monetary gains. So all this, when I did that, all open source contributions, I did not get any money for that. But in the long run, it paid off. It paid off for Google, recognizing me as a Google developers expert. After my first company, I never had to apply for any particular job at all. I feel blessed. I think I think it's not me who is responsible for all of that. It's just me being blessed. But these things contributed at some point. And then people reached out to me, and I usually say this to the developers as well, that often there's someone on LinkedIn reaching out to me just because I post about small stuff that I do. I did this, I did that, just keep doing this. And I think if you do it for the sake of sharing information, and that's your mindset, I think that's really good. If you try to do it for example, if I spend 1 month sharing knowledge every day, in the hope of finding a job, then if I'm not getting enough responses, I will get demotivated right away. That's what happens. If my goal is I need to be someone who shares knowledge every day, doesn't matter what happens, then it's really, really likely that I will hook up into LinkedIn algorithm. People would start reaching out to me and I will build a following or something. So I hope you understand the mindset. And this is the mindset I've followed and I've seen results for myself. Having said that, that's pretty much it for today. The easiest way to get a contribution is just searching on GitHub in the language that you prefer. If you want a detailed video, write in the comments. I can try to make it on YouTube. If you want to find me on YouTube, the URL is Code with Ahsan. So if you go to youtube.com/code with Ahsan, you can essentially find a lot of good tutorials there as well. But I don't have one at the moment that specifically talks about how to contribute to open source. Maybe I can create one. But imagine having someone, some random guy on YouTube who has a small project that they're trying to work on and they need help. If you are even a tiny bit experienced, you can just help them out with one issue. That's a contribution that you have given. Even if it's not a famous project, share on GitHub. Share that this was my first contribution for today, or this was my first contribution ever. Just share that. And then also help that person. For example, if they're really, really new, you can help them to, for example, deploy their project. You're actually helping someone being more productive, being more competent as well. So if that's your idea, that's your goal, that's your mindset, I think there's no stopping you. So that's all I wanted to share today. I wanted to share about how open source basically changed my life, my mindset, my approach towards being a software developer, and how it actually contributed to the growth of my career. Even though open source itself was something that initiated everything, but I think it was the mindset, it was the experience, it was all the criticism that I got from a lot of people, and then just the fact that I kept trying and never stopped and never looked into why am I not getting the results in 3 months or 4 months or 5 months. I never looked into it. I think that's what made it really smooth for me. So I think now I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to answer any questions that you might have. And I'm also going to stop sharing my screen. Thank you. Thank you. So if you have any questions about open source or job market, I think now would be a good time to ask. If you won't, then I'm just going to go away. And I can see I have 10 more minutes before I have to run. Lee's asking, how did you feel after your PRs got declined? That's a good question. I was not happy. I can also say that I was a bit angry as well sometimes that, why did this happen? Some of the PRs that got rejected, it was my fault because I did not really follow up. So as you saw in my talk as well, someone asked a comment and then I did not reply for a month and then it got declined. I was like, meh, doesn't really matter. But some some PRs where they said, no, we have similar PRs that solve the same problems. I think one of those had PRs that was contributed after my PR as well. And I was like, okay, I submitted the PR first. Why did you not really merge it? I obviously didn't say it, but yes, that's what I felt. But I think I have a good reflection system. So I think about my actions. So if I'm being angry, if I'm being hurt, for example, I have a system in my brain to basically think if this is really important, and what if it's not. So I think that's the question I usually ask myself. So I think I immediately realized that my purpose for submitting the PR was not really to get it much, but rather to contribute. And if someone else is contributing this, yeah, it's fine. I do remember when I was a junior and I did not have a lot of experience, I was more strong on the side of being offensive or expecting a lot more. But I think as I got more senior, I got more calmer. And then the expectations change as well. Zen says, amazing session. Thank you. No problem. I'm looking at all other questions as well. Beyond says, thank a Lord, Ahsan. No problem at all. How can I contribute as an intermediate level developer as they are experts already working on it? That's a good question, Shiraz. So if you want to work on small projects, when you try to go to GitHub or even just Google it, there is a label that is called good first issue. So good first issue is something that you want to search for. You also want to search for what we call first time contributors. So these are two labels that are often on GitHub repositories. And a lot of people who are working on open source are doing full time jobs. So they don't really have the time to do it. So sometimes you would see already created issues on the projects that you can find if you're just starting out scratch. Sometimes you can just go and look at the documentation of any project that you're working on or you know of, for example. So, for example, NGX device detector, you know about it now. Go to the project, see if you can find a typo in the documentation or if you can see an improvement. For example, the README that we have, if you can think of that, okay, I can make this better, or this example is not accurate, we could maybe share some more information, or adding my social links, for example, in a readme, if you think that's valuable. Those are some things that you can do for almost every project and you don't even have to go into the code. So just the documentation part is, I think, really really cool to do. Similarly, I can recommend you one thing, that is, for example, angular.dev is a new documentation website which Angular team has built. And since it's really new, it might have a lot of issues in typography or just sentences, or there might be broken links or something. So you can also start contributing to those, like small things. So not really coding part, but the documentation part. And if you can do that well, then obviously you can go to the next level. So when you try to contribute to something, it's not just that you're contributing to the code base or you're just fixing something, but there's a whole process, like you're forking the repository, you're cloning it, you're running the project. Even that part really teaches you a lot. And when you start sort of digging into some project's code, even that gives you quite a lot. So as I said before, if you keep the mindset that I want to contribute, I want to look into the project and learn from it, and that is your mindset, I think you're gonna learn a lot. And even though if you're not able to submit PRs, you're still going to be learning a lot. But eventually you will be submitting PRs. There's Once you go into it, then there's no stopping you, of course. So I hope that answers the question. Arash says, are you bothered when companies ask for new features regarding your projects and when they don't even pay? That's a good question, Arash. So first of all, I don't really look at who's asking. I think so. There's been a person in the Islamic history named Hazrat Ali, and he has a really good quote. He says, don't look at who's saying it, but rather what is being said. So for me, it's really important as well. So I don't really care if it's an individual or a company that's coming in. If Even if an individual comes in and the individual is rude and they say implement this right away, and keeps adding comments like add it, or when will you do it, when will you do it, then I would be like, okay, I don't have time to do it, can someone else contribute? So I would try to delegate it to someone else. But even if it's a company, then yes, I would say, yeah, I don't have time for it. I won't go towards being paid, because the reality is that when you go open source, that means that yes, you are saying this is for free. On GitHub, you have the culture of sponsoring. So there can be companies who sponsor you for your work that you're doing, but essentially there's nothing for paid content. If I want to build something for paid, then I would just go that route. I would go do freelance or something. But open source projects are not for those. So if anyone is trying to request work for me, having the expectation of what you should have when you pay someone, then yeah, I would just laugh at that condition and I would ignore it, to be honest. But I don't think I'm bothered really easily. I have really high patience, and that has helped me quite a lot. Awesome. I'm gonna look at the time as well, and if we have more questions, then we can also take those. I do remember that there were some questions that were supposed to be sent towards me by email, so I'm gonna double check if they are there. Da, 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 da. Not here, and not here as well. Cool. Then I think we can wrap it up early. So then I think we're good. I don't see any more questions. So thank you so much everyone for joining. I'm gonna share some links in the chat which are important so you can keep up with anything that I'm working on. So this is my GitHub if you don't have it already. And if you're interested in getting the latest version of the Angular cookbook that I'm working on, it's supposed to be released in December. So hopefully that goes live pretty soon. I'm just wrapping up and finishing up on those. And if you want to contribute to open source, just find me on LinkedIn. You should find it on my GitHub as well. Just find me on LinkedIn, ask questions, show your intentions that you're interested in working on open source projects. I might be able to find some projects for you. I might also be able to do it on a live stream in the future as well, so I can show you like this is how you contribute as well. So if you have the intentions to do so, just connect with me on LinkedIn and we'll take it from there. So having said that, I think we can wrap the event. One more thing that I just recall. Give me 1 second. There are some questions that were sent to me as well. I'm gonna quickly double check because there were some questions. Yes. Du-du-du-du. Yes. And I'm gonna just move this guy right here. Okay. So the questions that have been asked are: is there a difference in the backend part of the open source? I think that question basically means if you can work on front end or backend projects separately. Yes, you can find JavaScript projects, you can find backend projects and front end projects on GitHub. So there's no difference in those. There's one question: are there any example projects blogs that you have guidelines for setting up a structured pull request issue for a project you would like to contribute to? I don't have it yet, but I will note this down so I can create one. No problem. One question is: how would you start if you have to start over your career? That's a really good question. I think I would start my career by writing articles as much as possible in the beginning. I would also start just by creating a lot of projects with the skill set that I have, even if they are not perfect. And I would just start sharing those projects. I would just create a lot of projects in my portfolio. That's how I would do it. One question is: how can we promote open source softwares to encourage more transparency in apps that we use? That's a good question. I think if you try to promote it in your projects and if it's public, then it's good to give them credit. For example, I give credit to the ng device detector package on my package, that this is where I took the inspiration from. So I think this is really, really important to basically give all the credits as well. But apart from that, I think it's just good to highlight them on your social media. If you're a company, then just appreciate the open source maintainers for those projects. Like, this person has this really cool library that we are using. And if you are a company, then also you can sponsor those projects as well if you are really into it. So that would be my suggestion. And I'm going to take the last. Ooh, I have so many questions. I'm going to take the last question because I have to rush now, but I think I can take it from the chat instead. How would you write an article at the beginning of your career? How would you find topic not already covered well? Lots of articles on Medium are inaccurate. That's a good question. So you can start with, if you have an inaccurate article, just start with that. Make it accurate or keep it small. So for the first article that I would personally write for myself has to be really small. It would not be too big. For example, let's say, what is the fastest or different ways of running a loop in JavaScript. So for loop, for each, blah, blah, blah. You can start working on those. I think technically it's not that complicated, but you can definitely write on that topic. Similarly, if there's something that came recently into the framework or library that you really, really liked, you can just have an example of that particular thing on your article. For example, JavaScript's latest version included the to array, to sliced, some methods that were really important. So you can talk about those. You might find articles on the internet that are filled with information, a lot of information, including the to array and to spliced. But you can take those small things out and then write an article about that and see, how people react to it. So start small and then reiterate over time. It's not gonna be that you go for perfection and then do it. Rather, you just do it a lot of times. So I remember I'm gonna end it with this quotation and this survey I wanted to share as well, which is a university professor took an approach. I think it was in the late 80s in the US. And they basically were a photography class. And he divided the class into two groups. One group was working on, he said that I'm going to measure you at the end of the semester and I'm going to mark you or give you marks based on two different things for two different groups. The first group was the quality group, and they were told that you need to create one photograph or one picture that has to be the highest quality possible. It has to be perfect. And the second group was told that I will give you marks based on how many images you produce or how many pictures you produce. If you produce 100, then you get a plus. Otherwise, or you get a B or a C, depending on the number of pictures that you've produced. At the end of the semester, when the professor saw both of the groups, the group that produced the highest quality of the pictures was the group quantity, not the quality one. So that shows a lot. And the reason, according to the professor, was that they failed so many times and they had the iteration so many times that they could implement multiple techniques that they analyzed, got feedback on, and then proceeded with a different approach. And that produced a lot of quality. Whereas the quality one, they were working in sort of a silo and they couldn't really produce that much of a result. And I think that really resonates with how I approach things subconsciously as well. But then just creating a lot of things. I don't really care about it has to be perfect. I care about that I do it. So that's the goal, I would say. It's like going to the gym, not looking at how much you have grown over time, but just showing up. I think that's what really matters. With that said, I have to rush because because the time for my prayer is about to end, so I have to run. But thank you so much for joining. This was really good. I told Maria, one of the organizers as well, that one of this is going to be one of my favorite talks because I had so much of the stories to tell. But thank you everyone for joining. Let's stay connected, and all the best for all the open source work that you do from today. Have a good one.